the session and let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, thanks.
Great. So, so we were talking about guidelines yesterday and what are the best practices and what are the latest changes in terms of templates and Fiori elements. What are the basic things required for Fiori elements, etc. And we are going to look some more details in terms of guidelines a little bit, and then we'll try to move on. Mm, So yesterday we just talked about how floor plans are working. So what is the purpose of this templates, etc., and why exactly the smart templates or the Fiori elements uses metadata for generating the applications, etc. So this is what we understood, and we were just trying to understand. See, if we are building custom applications, nobody is actually specifically pinpoints us to follow any best practices, but it's highly recommended to follow SAP Fiori guidelines for in order to build the same kind of user experience for all our applications. Because if customers are using any of the standard SAP Fiori applications, they're generally bound to expect the same kind of experience while accessing or while using our custom applications which we design. So SAP Fiori guidelines allows us to set that context. So if you are anytime using any control, if you are at any cost, if you feel that is it the right control to use at this particular situation, then for the specific version, like we identified how to identify specific version of the customer landscape. So we have to check our UFA framework guidelines specific to that particular UFA version, and we need to follow those guidelines. And easiest way to do these things is just let me show you. So for guidelines are specific to a specific scenario as such. For so always we generally by default we look for SAP Fiori. And even the API reference when we are referring also, if on the top, if you see, if you notice, so we do have option to change the version. So even the API when your controls etc. Because some of the controls can be you know not available if you're trying to use some controls which are very latest always by default. Maybe your customer may not be yet to have those libraries in your environment. So it's always mandatory that we ensure that we are using the controls which are available on the server. So we need to ensure that this is as a primary check, because we generally tend to overlook the type of controls available and then we try to design. It can lead to again complications. So certain functionalities, like if you look at export type CSV. So we used to have for exporting into spreadsheet. Earlier we used to have export type CSV as a library. Now we have something called spreadsheet library. Similarly for PDF viewing, etc. Earlier there was no viewer as such, but from 1.5 onwards they introduced something called sap.m.pdf viewer. So there are like certain embedded controls as well which are now all you need to do is whenever you're looking at, suppose we were just we'll try to understand about button. So there are like different buttons itself in SAP where we have segment button, we have we can use how different ways we can use as well would be illustrated. Now I'm just referring to a simple button control. So if you see on top, they'll specify you what all types of buttons are available. So you are free to choose M button or toggle button or segmented button or menu button. But when to use which type of control and when it is recommended, we'll have a simple instructions. If you see simple button for one action, if you just have a single action, then we generally tend to use SAP.M button. If you're looking at switching a state like camera and video mode, then toggle button is recommended. We just need to understand the scenario and accordingly we need to opt the right control. So identifying controls can be, it should be appropriate. So it can be both done using two icons placing side by side as well. But toggle button makes more better. And we do have segment button where you group of actions. So segment button is similar button. So I can just show you. So if you can see, this is a segment button. Segment button is like multiple buttons, either text or we can give an icon where mobile view or tablet view or desktop view. So when we are trying to show or completed progress, some tabular data, if you wanted to filter the data based on completed open, etc. So we can use an icon tapper or we can use segment button as well. So these are some of the scenarios where it really helps. And we have one more called menu button where if you see here, so these all are part of navigation list entity, but this is a type of menu. So where we can have drop down where selection of rows and etc. So those kind of scenarios we can use menu button. So we do have specific guidelines and when not to use. Always it's recommended to use these criteria. So do not use if you want to link to a different page or an object. If you're trying to link to a different page, do not use a button. Instead, we are supposed to use a link. So if we want to let users upload, then use upload collections of a button. So sometimes we try to use some upload button and you try to build the custom dialog, etc. Do not do the such a way. The button purpose should not be for uploading or as a link, but instead use the respective control. So this gives us, if you are having some control in picture, so always look for guidelines so that we can identify the right controls to be used and when not to use and how to use in different scenarios. So they try to give us some basic examples. So this is one aspect of it. And second aspect of is certain times you might see some different options as well. If you see here, we can use an icon with emphasized type. If you said this is how it looks. If it is not pressed, we can use it as transparent. So types of button properties, type of properties, etc. What can be used as well can be suggested. One best example is message handling. So message handling generally we overlook where when we are trying to show some error message to the end user, we try to keep any generic messages. But SAP do suggest certain error formats. So how do we actually specify the error message formats? So if you look at here, so they try to say uh, they classify into different types. So if an issue has occurred that prevents from processing, so in order to resolve, then we set as error. So when to classify as error, when to classify as warning, when to classify as information. So they try to clearly differentiate as well. And we need to use respect to informations as well. So we should not block the flow of the application every time. So only when it is really necessary, we need to use. So here also we do have a couple of controls called message box, message popper, and we do have different ways to show the error message as well. So these are some of the controls which can be used to control only specific message handling. So when you want to abstract the user application flow, so message box, popper, message view, toast, strip. So these are some of the controls which can be used. So you do have some uh, description as well, so when to use, when to not use, etc. So and how many options you can show as well. So there are like some really good ways of defining as well. So we do have message popper when you have a form kind of application where you have many rows of if each row and next to the row, instead of showing a message that this field cannot be empty, this field cannot be, so it may not be you cannot actually provide lots of information or text at this particular location, field location. Now postal code city, we cannot actually provide lots of information. Instead, SAP recommends to use a message popper where on the footer you'll have some icon which shows with how many errors are there, how many warnings are there. Once you know that you have classified, then we can use these specific controls to show all the list of errors within the page. So user can try to rectify each of them, and they can know that none of the things are um, there is an issue at all. So we do use value state as well. So these are some of the ways by which we will come to know that some information. Okay, these are the best practices to adopt while building applications. So the simple thumb rule is always generally look for, if you are not sure how to use, or if you still slightly have a confusion that okay, this is not going to work, or is it the right thing to do, then always we need to look for the control out here. Then it tries to give us a narrow path so that we can proceed further. So this is in short summary about guidelines, etc. So now we are going to talk about the architecture. So let's understand architecture. So this would be our the next go to topic, where we're going to understand where exactly the Fiori sits into, and according to the customer landscape, which are the right ways to deploy our landscape. So if you're someone, your customer is someone very new who is try to use Fiori for the first time, or if they are migrating from ECC to S4 HANA, or they are looking at S4 HANA to cloud movement. So if we have different uh, architectures, etc., in picture, and we are going to talk in couple of days, coming days, why generally we do frameworks, and in general, where does SAP UFS stand in terms of Angular JS, React JS, etc., and comparison of frameworks we do. And in Fiori 3 specifically, there's a new concept called UFF Web Components. So I'll talk more about web components. It's blending UFA and AngularJS and Vue and React.js together to build more interesting use cases. So this is just a very new approach. It's just evolving. So and where exactly the future scope of UX lies also we're going to talk. So these are some things which we talk. So I'm just moving on to the architecture point of view. So this is a simple way to put together. So your customer is having any SAP product. So be it SAP ECC, Business Suite, or S4HANA. He's having older one or newer one, whichever on-premise system he has. So these are the overall technology stack which resides. And by default, so if you see, look at the technologies. So these are the technologies which currently are in UI space. Okay. And Fury Launchpad is nothing but on the browser. So we run on a browser, or we can run on our Android or mobile devices or tablet devices. So all Fury enables us is the top UI layer, and your on-premise system is a backend layer. So in order to connect these two, we do use some middleware that is known as Odata Protocol. So Odata is an API, so which enables us to securely connect the UI to the backend. So any data which is coming from backend, like be it your system, it flows through the Odata API. So Odata API controls the access to some extent. So how does it control? So we do have, if in SAP the business logic, it has a number of process. It could have all sorts of tabular data, but from the launchpad you cannot access all the data. So the OData API has a limited set of entities, etc., which are exposed. So to the extent of the entities which are exposed, only those data can be consumed from the top layer, known as the Fiori launchpad. So we can put it this way to more precisely understand. So I'll just generally talk what differs when we try to use in ECC and S/4HANA. So when we are building our applications, we are building on this layer, and is a basic way to understand is So this is our Fiori apps. So what are Fiori apps we are consuming it? So generally we consume from our launchpad. So this is a way. So they can be Fiori apps can be independent as well. So if your customer using some website and they are using some .NET website or they were using some Java website, any website, but it is running on as it's a web app. When you say a web app, so it's running on a browser. So if it's a web app, then if you want to integrate, then you can very well integrate you as a standalone as well. So you can build an UF application consuming data from the SAP as a source, and the source will be your SAP system. So SAP, it could be SAP HANA or it could be you see the product could be SAP SAP S4 HANA or ECC, and underlying DB could be anything. For S4 HANA by default, HANA would be the DB where the database is itself is HANA, whereas ECC predominantly most of the customers have Oracle ASDB. But I think chances of HANA being used on ECC are very slim because none of the customers might be actually the number of customers using ECC on HANA will be probably very less, because when HANA was introduced with S4 HANA, it became as a general adoption. So that was a strategy to replace Oracle. So it's in memory based. So generally for high volume data, HANA database tends to be more performance intensive. So be it any data, wherever it's residing in SAP system. So those data can be, we can build a Fiori web app as a standalone of Fiori Launchpad. If you are using any portal, UFI apps can be integrated directly over there. For example, you have a timesheet application. So timesheet application itself alone can be integrated with any of the customer landscape. So how do you do that, etc.? I'll try to show in the Launchpad configurations. So we can do that. So this is our top layer. So general practice, SAP recommended practice is to use the Launchpad. Okay, Launchpad runs on any browser, and recommendation is to use HTML. It runs only on HTML5 compatible browsers. As on date, all browsers in the market are HTML5 compatible. But legacy browsers, if customers are using some IE, etc., then it's a big no. Fiori doesn't work on older internet technologies. It works on latest HTML5 uh, itself. So it's a HTML5 compatible programming approach model, which uses HTML5 as a backbone. So your browser should be HTML5 compatible. That is the minimum criteria for the UI layer. So minimum criteria. So this is important thing to understand. And the middle layer which we use is Odata API. So Odata API is, it's a combination of, see, Microsoft is the one who has actually introduced and developed Odata API, and it has been now made it as like Apache, how we have an open source community kind of. So we do have Odata.org. So it's multiple vendors are actually providing their inputs, and they are developing this particular ecosystem. So OData API is meant for mobile friendly and as well as tablet and other mobile device friendly. So if you have any devices, they need low volume data, and it has to be very fast as well. So for limited chunks of data and for lightweight models, OData is best suitable for lightweight models. Not very resource intensive, it's very lightweight model. So for those cases, OData API is very efficient. And we do have V2 and V4. So V2 has been existing since last 4 or 5 years as such. Now it's time to move on to V4. So OData V4 is like how HTML5 is the standard. So OData V2, V4 are the standards in terms of OData API. So now currently V4, there are like lots of optimizations and lots of improvements have been done in this space. But still all SAP UFI framework doesn't fully support V4. So today, if you want to build analytical list report or a tree table, etc., those are still yet not yet compatible on V4. Only all controls are compatible on V2. All are compatible. All UFI controls are compatible, but on the V4, um, ELP, tree table, etc., are not compatible. So this we just have to understand this. So it's not common. So this is a simple way to understand. So technically what we do is, in order to securely communicate the data, so what we do have is, so this is how the to and fro the data will be. So whenever we are trying to request data from the browser or from any of these approaches, so data flows through Odata API, and Odata API pulls out data only to the extent we are authorized. So how it is handled is, we do have one more here called SAP Web Dispatcher, so which sits at in between. So here we do have Web Dispatcher. So So any most of the customer, they use their own load balancer, etc. So Web Dispatcher is serves two-way purpose. Its main objective is to like if you have any request or originating. So now currently, if you see, this whole architecture can be set up in two ways. So you can have Fiori FES. So we call it as a Fiori front end server. You can have two servers wherein you can design this whole architecture in two ways. One, so we can design this in this architecture. We can design in two ways. Okay. So one is embedded hub, and other is central hub. For ECC, generally, it is recommended to go with central hub. For ECC, it's recommended to go with central hub. So you can go with embedded or central hub. So, but that doesn't actually change some of the scenarios. But when to choose which architecture, etc., just single shot I can explain. So it's not mandatory that you have to use embedded hub or either central hub. But in general, if for ECC, the number of application scenarios are very low, if you ask me. So for ECC alone, the number of Fiori apps, the count of apps. See, for right now itself, if you look at the App Store, like we previously discussed, so Fiori apps library. So if you look at a library, the number of apps for the whole SAP ecosystem itself is there around 13,000. And for the ECC segment alone, the number of apps is too low. Okay. But if you are, if any customer is trying to look for ECC adoption on the ECC itself, he's trying to use, then it's highly recommended that they can go for a central hub. Or if they want to try with very limited set of apps, etc., if they're trying to use as a long-term perspective as well, then the same system they can use. Now in this case, instead of a separate front-end server, so all the Fiori apps can be hosted and the libraries can be hosted on one dedicated server, so that we can call as Fiori front-end server. And you can host your backend data, so business data can be hosted in a separate server instance called as business data in on a BES, so backend server. We can call this as a backend server. So if you are using someone an ECC, and if you prefer to use um, embedded hub, so that means all your apps, etc., would be available on the single system called the same backend system itself. On top of it, we'll add. So how does it look like? So if you go to our application in this case, so here let me show this as well. Let me log into this. So I'm just logging into the GUI system here. Let me log in here. So we just have to go to our application. Now this is my system. So whether it is an embedded hub or whether it's a central hub, I'm just going to have a look at, and I'll just show you how to identify whether it's a central hub, etc. So if you are someone running any of the applications, so you can go to the system, the status. So like yesterday, I was just mentioning it. So you can look at the software component install products, etc. So what all software components, etc., install will come to know. Now in this case, we do have FES. So we do have S4 HANA, this Fiori FES 2020. So Fiori front-end server S4 HANA 2020 edition is available on this particular system. And one way to shoot shot to check is if you wanted to connect all the Fiori applications. So the add-ons are also available here, SAP UI add-ons, etc. And any of the business components are also available or not, we can check. Now in this case, BW components are there. So and all the basis applications are also there. So here you can by looking at the components, if there could be add-ons, there may not be business data, and at some cases. So here we can come to know which components are available and which components are not available. Okay, this is point number one. And by looking at it, we'll come to know that whether this has. So if you are looking at any S4 system, even in the backend also you'll find these components. So that cannot conclude that it is a central hub or an embedded hub. So any system, like I said, if it is having S4 HANA product, by default you have. If it is ECC also, if your network stack is 7.4, you'll have these components. So that cannot be a thumb rule for us to decide. But we can check for, first of all, these components are there or not. Once we have these components, go to your IWFND main service and okay, this has been, let me check this. So two ways we can look for this information. Let me quickly open this. So this is how the image looks. So I just in the ES5 we did not have, just I wanted to quickly show you what we can do. So I just need the image. So this is how your maintenance service looks like. So this is where all your Odata API. So the API which we are talking about. So the Odata API. So all the Odata API can be viewed from IWFND main service. So that's a T code where we can view all the listed services. So if your customer is having, once you have access to the whichever system, they say that they are using an SAP system, and all you can do is you can go to IWFND/main service, and you can look for the list of all OData list of all OData services. OData services are that which all the OData APIs currently are already created in the system, which are available. All can be viewed, be it SAP shipped for Fiori apps or be it custom services which are built. All the services can be viewed here. If you look at here, you do have a section called system alias. If you see the system is pointing to local or is it pointing to some remote system. So this is the one which defines whether we are accessing the data from the same system or we are accessing this data from some remote system. So if your case, if you are using a central hub, it generally tends to use, it has a separate front end server is separate and your business data is residing separate. Generally, ideally, it is best practice to have a central hub for ECC environment, because you can have, if you are not yet sure, you can actually try it out all the new apps, etc., on the ECC front in this dedicated system, and you can consume. If the number of implements are very low, then unnecessary to spend and lifting and shifting of all the applications, etc., it's a tedious job. So in those cases, you can set up single system to use both as your business data as well as for Fiori system as well. So in those case, it instead of local, here you can add multiple systems with trusted RFC. We can connect to respective backend systems and we can maintain multiple system alias over here. So this is a place where we can add one more system, multiple systems connections we can establish here, and we can maintain system alias. So each service we can define uniquely from where the data has to be pulled out. So this is a T code which tells us how to connect and how to establish connection to the respective backend system, right? So by default in S4 HANA, it's always SAP recommendation is to use a single system. So because you have all the built-in functionalities, etc., available. So instead of maintaining lots of use cases, etc., it will be dual maintenance. So the number of apps and ecosystem is very high because in S4 HANA more apps, etc., would be released. Always, if you're maintaining two environments for your OData services which are residing on the business data, Both places you have to have dual maintenance. There's this pros and cons as well. Pros and cons. When I talk about pros and cons, so of embedded hub will be advantage where single system acts as Fiori and and used for business data. The advantage is low. I mean, it's like simple Fiori implementations, and number of use cases are limited. So you're not using too many products. So if some customers will be using a PLM product, CRM product, SRM product, lots of products, SAP products. If the user is not a heavy user of SAP products, they are using very limited set of SAP use cases, and their like number of use cases is low. Then you generally tend to not to invest very heavily on a central hub approach where you have dedicated FES, etc. If your use cases are very limited, you can simply opt for an embedded hub where the same system you can use it as your you can use this approach. Okay, and advantage is low maintenance as well. So low maintenance as you have a single system to manage. Okay. Now in case of central hub, for S4 HANA instance, it is recommended to go with central hub. Uh, Due to the advantage, see if you have FES separate and VS separate, the challenge is you have to make sure that both are running on the same version. If you try to if you want some new features out there in FES, so because we want some Fiori 3.0 features, so we tend to upgrade only on the FES. Suppose now if I upgrade to 1 point here for S4 HANA 2020 edition, so 2020 edition. So here also they do have add-ons called FES 5.0, 4.0, 6.0, etc. And then latest is HANA S4 HANA FES 2020. So if you're upgrading here and you're not upgrading here, then you may not be able to leverage all the applications. The applications has dependency to what backend stack you have. And that is again a problem. You can build your custom solutions, but the standard SAP Fiori solutions do require both places it has to be updated. So you have to make sure that even your backend as well as front end are updated to the same extent. Certain business functionality may not be, because they might have some custom implementation. It's not always customer won't quickly upgrade to the latest instance very quite frequently. Okay, but the release cycles in UFI framework etc. are very fast and very quick. Okay, we do get lots of release cycles. We do see and new features we are tend to see in FES space. So it's good practice to have both instances with the same FES 2020 itself. I'll just show you why. So if you go back to our apps library, so here if we could see around 13,000 apps. So huge Fiori implementation we see, and if you are trying to connect multiple data points, if you're connecting to SRM, and if you're connecting to some PLM, you're connecting to CRM system, you're trying to connect to some Ariba, etc., whatever SAP product, etc. Multiple products accessing them, and if you're managing individually, if you're building Fiori apps on top, embedded hub on directly on top of SRM, and here also you're building Fiori apps on top of PLM, and here also you're trying to build Fiori apps. So if you just notice the kind of complexity, we have to maintain our application on all the three systems. It's very tedious job. So as you're scaling your application implementations, it becomes really tedious to have embedded hub. So this is a it's as a drawback. So in this case it's always good practice to have a central drawback is back of embedded hub. We have to maintain multiple versions on different stacks, right? So if you have a simple dedicated system, so FES central hub, so at one place we can deploy all kinds of Fiori apps that are suitable for any environment, any business data. then we can use and leverage, and we can just rely, or we can keep our SRM etc. data with only business data. We need not to bother about having the Fiori apps etc. So each of these systems will carry only the business data, right? So they have only the data, and we have all the Fiori apps or custom implementation, everything we do on a central place. So this is an advantage where you can scale up, and all your standard Fiori apps in here, they are coming up, they will be available. All the custom solutions, they'll be available irrespective of the system, using just a system alias. So alias, we can connect directly to remote systems using trusted RFC. We can connect, right? Different stacks. So when I mean stacks, other environments. So be it as your ECC or S4 HANA product, if you hang multiple products and different, say customers generally prefer to have their business data residing in different instances. So in on-premise, they generally have S4 HANA instance for different products in separate. So usually huge customers, they'll have lots of SAP on-premise environments, and all those environments, in order to connect, it is always a recommended practice to use central hub for S4 HANA. So in S4 HANA, go for central hub. In case of ECC, if you would like to have low use cases, go for embedded hub. But it's in general practice, it's recommended to go with central hub. So this is in short about architecture. And the web dispatcher, as I was talking, so web dispatcher tries to allow, or see, it tries to authenticate whether we do have access to the endpoint or not. So whether we are having access to PLM data, whether we are having access to this SRM data. So underlying backend system, whether we do have access, and according the based on the number of requests, it tries to act as a load balancer as well. So many customers, they use their own web proxies. They do have the identity providers, different identity providers they use. So what are identity providers they use? Everything will generally have this basic task of authenticating whether they do have access to the underlying business data or not. So in general, if you're going for central hub, you have to make sure that the user has ID available on, so he should have his ID, same content. Right. So we do have this way. Okay, let me all write it here. So in general, what I was trying to say is, I just lost the context. I think I was just talking about. Yes, I think web dispatcher. Yes, web dispatcher, like identity provides anything they are generally using. So general way is, we can, customers can use any of them. So in order to connect to the underlying data, but general practices, we do have IDs etc. So if you're having an SAP ID as a user, so you have to extend that SAP ID to all the underlying systems. So if he's trying to access the data from front end server, so central hub, this is what a central hub system. So they could call it with different names. So in SAP generally they use a three-letter word called for the different landscapes. So if you're hanging a central hub system and you're hanging SAP ID, you have to make sure that that ID is extended to all the backend systems. So if you're on ECC, you might have a different system, but whichever system, as for HANA systems also, but different products. So you have a business data products, whatever the product may be. So So you have ECC product, or you have an CRM product, etc. Whatever product you have, all the systems, your SAP ID has to be extended. So SAP ID. So this web dispatcher tries to route the traffic So it checks for all the same origin, and it tries to rectify the. See, we have something called same origin policy. What same origin policy is? Say now in internet, many people in the disguise. So if you are not properly securing the application's architecture, the problem is anybody can misuse your IDs, and they can try to retrieve, pull out the data, in disguise. So anything in order to avoid, so if some third party is trying to intercept the data, so those all can be avoided if you follow same origin policy. What exactly same origin policy is? Same origin policy is a simple concept where if the request is originating from the same source or not. So if the request here, when I try to send a request from here, this is a separate system, and this is a different system if you're following a central hub. So it's two different systems. Now system doesn't know that it is in this case what happens is, in general, if request is coming from simple SAP server, then it knows that the request and response are reaching to the same person. Okay, I'll just try to show it in a different way. So if the request, suppose we are requesting for a page, so we have a page out here. So we are trying to fill in some user ID, password details, etc. So we do have some user ID. We entered some password. Okay, some password we have entered. So this password, when we are entering it, so this is the source system is if the source system is same or not. Source is in the sense the request we are sending it, is it coming from the same system or is it coming from the different system? So your expectation is it has to come from this system called A. Okay, so we are trying to use a system called A, suppose. So it has to, if it is coming from the same system or is it coming from the different system, will be automatically restricted. If it is getting rerouted, so instead of we try to authenticate, and it has to technically hit our SAP database to authenticate, but without hitting SAP database, if it is reaching to some other destination, if the IP address or anything is changing, then automatically the request, etc., would not be automatically revoked. So UFA framework by default enforces same origin policy. So any application, if they're if the source is differing, then automatically your request will be not accepted. It straight away will say you are not authorized, or it will say cross origin policy. Okay, so the origin should be the same. But if you're using an a central hub approach, where your FES is a different system, FES is a different server. So technically the server IP here, the IP could be different. So IP would be different, right? So would be different. So the request originates from different system, and your BES will have a different IP. So how do we resolve this? So web dispatcher tries to route the traffic, that it uses a proxy, and which ensures that it mimics as if the request and response are originating from the same system. So web dispatcher takes care of routing the traffic. So if you're having multiple backend systems and multiple business data, so using trusted RFC securely, it acts as a proxy, and it reroutes, and it ensures that both requests are honored as if it is the same origin policy. So the web dispatcher does the task of as a proxy, which ensures that the requests are routed to the intended target system. As well, it handles the load better. So if you're having, so suppose you are having a very huge load of customers, then multiple copies of SAP systems would might have been maintained by your customer, and it can better reroute the traffic as well. Suppose you are having a mock drill you are trying to do as part of business continuity plan, and you wanted to quickly remove your production data into some instance too. So instantly you can do it. All you have to do is you have to change the web dispatcher configuration, where you can change the system alias as well, and you can route the traffic to different instance altogether. So instance 1, instance 2, you can really change, and instantly end users will not have any effect at all. So all those things can be managed using web dispatcher. So web dispatcher acts as a load balancer, as well as it acts as a proxy to ensure same origin policies, etc., and to securely authenticate the users accessing business data are authorized or not. So all those activities can be useful as web dispatcher as a layer. Okay, so this is in short about here. And Right now, as Fiori we are talking about, so Fiori has as is the default UI. So prior to this, we do have existing application as well. So even we can integrate WebInfo applications, GUI for HTML. These are also our T code. These are from 91 onwards. WebInfo was being widely used. So SAP Fiori Launchpad do support these as well. So we can integrate them directly as tiles inside our Fiori Launchpad. So we are going to see in the configuration stage how we can integrate GUI applications, WebInfo applications alongside side by side with Fiori applications. So along with Fiori applications, we do can access as a tiles directly on the Launchpad itself. But they won't be. We are going to use as is T codes which will be running on your browser, but they should be browser compatible. If the WebInfo applications are not browser compatible, then they cannot be. We cannot run those on Fiori Launchpad. They should be compatible on the browser, and if they're compatible on the browser, definitely we can integrate classic UIs which are running on GUI, HTML, or WebInfo as well into our Launchpad. So Launchpad can be used as a central place on the top layer, and the Odata API can be used as a middle layer to consume all the data from the underlying DB. So this is a simple way. And if you wanted to uh, put some more deep inside, so where each of the components resides. So this is all about uh, inside a server, what all components we can expect. So in that context, if you try to look, so our browser has a launchpad, and launchpad hosts all the apps. So this layer, I'll just try to show you. So if you look at here, so this is our top layer. Now in terms of demonstration of the architecture, if you look at it, so this top layer. So these are the Fiori Launchpad apps. So this is a Launchpad which we are talking. So this is a Launchpad, and all the Fiori apps. So where do we find our Fiori apps? You just have to go to here. You will find something called App Finder. So if you go to App Finder, this is a place where you'll find all the apps which are added to your SAP ID. So if you're an SAP, you're having an SAP ID to access this particular Launchpad, then we do have something called catalogs and groups. So these on the left, which you are seeing, these we called as catalog. So catalog are role specific. So if suppose you are a purchaser or you're a sales manager, so sales manager we can create a catalog, and we can group all the apps which as a sales manager which will be useful to you in your day-to-day jobs. So all the apps in this case, if you say there is only single catalog called purchaser, and the catalog name is SAP EPM purchaser. So we call this as business catalogs, where end user can simply click on this pin and they can add to their respective group. So you can create your own favorites as well. So you can create your own favorites this way, where I might say that you, if these are my frequently used applications, maybe I'll say frequently used apps, etc. So you can create your own groups, frequently used apps. So or you can call it as favorites. You can create your own group, and you can which are the ones. See, there might be standardly groups which might be provided by as a developers when they are trying to deliver applications. They can categorize into different groups. But if you are working on different products, and for your day-to-day job you are tend to use different set of applications, then you can always pin and unpin which applications etc you want to have. And I'm just trying to add to my favorites. So this will be added to my favorites. Now I can go to home page, and then here you could see I think I have created one more as well. So this is what favorites. So shop and manage products. So these two can be accessible this way. So we can group and create our own groups as well. The groups which are classified are by default some classification would be done and we try to ship it. Customers are free to select a list of apps which are assigned to their role. So using roles from the launchpad, from the app finder, they can choose which all apps they want to use. All these apps are built using HTML5 and JavaScript as the backbone. They use this as a basic building blocks. So we don't use in a straight away. Using these are rendered using UFA framework, the JavaScript logic, etc., and HTML5, etc. And we do have certain apps which are using Fiori element based approach where it is metadata driven, etc. These are part of framework concepts. So using framework concept, we tend to build applications as well. All those applications can also be would be run on our Fiori Launchpad. So Fiori Launchpad is your one place to run all your Fiori apps in simple short. So this is how the components look on your UI stack. And this is what the web dispatcher we had talked about, which tries to pick all the requests and routes the traffic to the intended destination. So that's what it does. On your front end server and back end server, this is how you have on the front end server. Generally, this is how the component. So how do we run? So all Fiori launchpads has to run and sit the some software components are necessary, right? So those components are part of UI components. We have SAP underscore UI. So this is what I was talking about. So we have discussed this in earlier class as well. Where, we have two components. So under the software component tab, install software. So SAP underscore UI. So this is a component which has all the launchpad, etc. So UI components. So SAP underscore UI is the one uh, which has all these components: launchpad, Fiori apps, Fiori elements, SAP UF apps, etc. So in specifically, where exactly we deploy on top of this UI component. If you have this UI component, you can build new apps. And in order to install etc config, we do use one T code called SICF. So SICF is a T code which is used to so SAP underscore UI is the component which ensures we can build new UEFI apps and install in SAP Fiori standard apps. So for be it new apps or standard apps, SAP UI components mandatory because that has all the what we call the necessary launchpad apps elements. What are the libraries required framework? Everything is bundled inside this SAP underscore UI. Okay, it do have a management mechanism of handling how the roles etc has to be handled. All those things are there. But how do we install an app? So how do we install an app? So the simple way is using the T code called SSCF. So SST code is meant to manage all your Fiori apps. So be it custom app, anything, all your apps are available on SSCF, and you have to manage from SSCF as a T code. So this is important T code to remember, and this is how you use. And to manage all your OData API. So OData API, in order to manage all the OData services listed in the system. So for this, we use IWFND slash main service. So this is a T code on your GUI. On your front end server, you just have to use these particular T codes to view the list of Fiori apps and to view the list of um, OData services. Okay, to view and manage. So you can activate, you can deactivate, you can enable, disable, what are restrictions you want to put. All the restrictions can be put to services as well as apps using these two T codes. So to view and manage your OData services in the FES. So what are there in the FES for all those things we can manage using this. So these two T codes we use very actively. And let me just quickly show you. So we just go to SICF. So this is a T code SSCF. So here you can, I'll just go for one application, random application I'll take some, your my inbox. So I'll take my inbox application. Okay. And I will dig deep into this. And in tomorrow's class, we'll dig deep into this, but at least I'll just start how, if I have to activate this particular my inbox application in my ecosystem. So how do we do that? So we have to check whether we have the required backend product and the necessary systems details, etc. So in this section, you can just quickly see how the my inbox application looks from this screen from the application below. So it shows you this is how your application will be looking, and there are like lots of versions out there. So you can check for the versions. So if you go to the implementation information, so if your target application, so your customer landscape, you need to identify your right version. So here, see, this is the latest version. for S4HANA 22 FP. So FP Service Pack 2 is new version is available after 2020. So this is the latest. Your customer may not be on the latest stack always. So if your customer is on S4HANA 1909 or he's on 1809 or he's still on older one. So these all are S4HANA, right? This application is available from S4HANA 1511 onwards. For example, if you do not have an S4HANA instance, then you have to choose your product as business suite. So if you are using your customer is not on S4HANA, he's on ECC, then you have to use your business suite as a criteria and you have to refine your application. So there are lots of versions of the same application and you just have to make sure that you're using the right one. So in this case, in case of ECC, it's not product specific. So SAP have do releases some new features, some fixes, etc. And latest change was done in Q4 2019. So Q4 2019 latest copy, if you want, you can just choose Q4 2019. And I'll just go inside the installation, and we're going to discuss in detail this one later. But just to give a quick idea, so you just have to go to configuration. So in the configuration, you do find two settings. So UF application and OData service. So this is the technical name of your application, and this is the path. So you can either copy this path and you can provide this path in the service path area. So this is a place where you try to provide service path. And once you give it, then you just have to click on execute. If the application is available, if it's available, you'll be able to see the application here. See Fiori inbox. So all you have to do is in the SSCF node, the path you can have to go here and you can just activate service. So the service is already active. If I want to deactivate, I can deactivate it. And if I want to activate it, so I can. So I'm not authorized. So I can act. So this application is already active. So all you need to do is right click and click on activate service. So then automatically your Fiori application will be activated. And to test this service, we can click on test service, and this would be launching our application in the standalone mode, and we can see the running application. Okay, so this is that simple. So here in this case, we are not authorized to access this particular application, but we were authorized to they were authorized were limited to only these applications. So shop, SAP application supply. So ESY system, there are like a couple of apps. So they added only access to these applications. So if we look at these applications, we will be able to access. But in general, in your actual landscape, you should be able to activate and run the application directly. So this is standalone URL. Automatically, if you're authorized, you would be able to access application. So this is that simple to activate an application on Fiori. So in the architecture, we just saw uh, this layer. So similarly, similarly how we do have gateway component. So like I mentioned, gateway component. In case of gateway component, all we have is IWFND main service. Sorry, GWFND. We do have a component, and that ensures that we can access and consume all our OData services. So similar to SAP underscore UI, we do have SAP underscore GWFND. So this is a gateway foundation. So this enables a gateway component. So if this is there, then you have your all the OData services are accessible. So you can access and consume all the OData services. So for that, like previously we have seen, we use this particular screen. So this is IWFND main service screen. So where we can see all our services. Here itself straight away we can activate and deactivate all the applications. So you have to select the service, click on ICF node on the leftmost area, and you just have to activate. Once it is activated, it will turn to green. That means its service has been activated. Similarly, we'll search for the service. Now for my inbox OData service, which is a service here. So we have this is our OData service. You have to search for the service in this particular list, and you just have to activate it. So once you activate both those things, your application would be readily available in your front end server. So that's as simple way to activate and ensure that your applications are available on your front end server. And provided the application, whether it has proper data or not, it all depends on your backend. So in the backend, if you have a proper data maintained, you can ask your functionals etc to create some sample data for demonstration purpose, so that if you have proper data available, then probably your application can have fetch the data in the form of Odata services, and it can render the my inbox application with meaningful data. So this is how a simple way the architecture can be explained. And I think I'll stop for today here. So we'll continue tomorrow with understanding more about frameworks and finer details about it. So in short, we understood what architecture is all about, and in reality, how it looks also we try to see.
Okay.
Any questions?
No. It's okay.
So then we'll catch up tomorrow, and tomorrow we'll continue with we'll talk